Anyway, getting to GamerGate. Uh, well, we literally last time I asked you, what do you think about games journalism? And we went on for like 45 minutes, I think it was.
Yeah, I
Unless I'm
think that
mistaken.
that was a good conversation too.
It
I
was.
think.
It was. I'm glad we had that, and there was some good content in there too. See, like we talked about the Battlefront stuff. I think that was a good.
Right. Yeah.
And then what do you do from here? Like, how do you build a better games press, given that the incentives and
Mm-hmm.
stuff are aligned as they are? But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
question two of games journalism is how responsive to calls for reform do you think the games press was?
Not responsive. Not particularly. I do think that there perhaps was a problem of. I'm going to say that there's a two pronged problem there. The first prong was that a lot of people were again distracted away from calling for reform from institutions by directing them towards individuals. But I would also say on the other side of that coin that that is a tactic by institutions that is used to keep people from holding them to account. Like that is I think a tactic that we can ascribe to basically any institution. They will do anything possible to divide and conquer. That is, it's a very simple thing. If there's a thing that they could be in the wrong over, or could be held to account, or could be forced to change that they don't want to change, the divide and conquer tactic is very often the the response. So, I mean, do we look at that as an organizational problem, or do we look at that as an institutional problem? I'm not exactly sure the correct response to it, but I would say that um, that problem is why they aren't responsive to some extent, at very least, not necessarily the entire reason, but to some extent, the fact that organizationally speaking, the entire mass isn't specifically going after an institution in their call for reform or whatever. Um, I think that a lot of people ended up with a lot of different targets, and I think that that was a lot of the problem. Is if you had it focused, if you had focus and were able to leverage all of the um, all of the power, I guess probably the best way to put it, the collective power of everybody involved, if it was all focused on one institution demanding one reform until they relent on that, I think you're much more likely to get them to relent on it. And I think that that's where the question of is this an organizational problem or an institutional problem? Obviously, the institutions are going to do anything they can to divide and conquer. So, organizationally speaking, is that that's perhaps the only place that you could change anything. But is it even? I don't know if it's possible with the way things currently are. I don't know, but I will say they were not. They absolutely were not responsive, and I think to get them to be responsive, uh, the interfacing that we as normal individual human beings without an institution behind us, we have to figure out a different way to leverage what we have against them. I think.
If we find a way, I'm sorry. This is. I want to get back to game shows. I want to just want to say this real quick. If we find a way to like, obviously communicate with them, sure, but like if we find a way to do so with like
With
text
some
too. I don't
degree
know if
of
they can
leverage.
read. Right. No, no. Well, leverage. What do you mean?
Oh, you no, you're talking about the whales again.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So I want to
Sorry, I thought
translate
you were
my.
talking
I
about
want to
games journalists. I was like,
translate my book into a way that the whales can understand, the cetaceans can understand.
sure,
I would
yes,
want to do. I would have
yes.
to. I would be willing to do like a crowdfunding campaign or something just for that. Like 5 years from now, just so we make this happen.
I mean, that would be just interesting to find out how a whale reacts to
So wait a second.
information.
This human and that human, and then the video game. What the fuck's a video game? And
Yeah, the
well,
reaction.
they
Exactly.
wait they. There'd be a whole market for that. There'd be a whole market for a lot of stuff, right? Assuming that like we incorporate them into our society, or we have like positive diplomatic relations with them, as a separate legal entity. Jesus, we're not gonna get off this topic.
Mm-hmm.
But like there'd be making video game companies would presumably like how would they make money though, right? Would they have jobs? I mean, they could, right? If they were equal citizens, they could work whatever job they wanted to. So like
Sure.
they could earn
I,
money and then buy video games that they play underwater or something, right? I mean, like it could be a thing.
I mean, obviously, you'd have to figure out a way for the content delivery to happen, and
Sure, yeah.
also for them to be able to interface with the content. But that's stuff that, I mean, that's a lot less of a hurdle, I think, than whether or not they're intelligent. I think that that's really once we've gotten over that and we've gotten the communication barrier. I think developing technology that could help their lives is, or just even entertain them, is not that absurd of a prospect.
No, not at all. It's going to happen probably. Well,
Yeah,
and that's
no,
good. I
most
think
likely.
we should have a cultural exchange, and I want to see cetacean artists and cetacean movies, like made by them, and showing a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
completely alien perspective. I want to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we got to get back to games. I'm sorry. Um,
I'm sorry, I didn't realize
well,
that you were
it's a
talking
good,
about whales.
it's really a good. We can work it into the GamerGate stuff. So if you were the editor in chief and one of your cetacean employees, no,
Well, I mean, it does
treat them
bring
the
an
same as any
interesting.
other employee. That's what you do. All
It
right.
does
Anyway,
bring a very. It does bring a very interesting question, though, which is kind of like sometimes when I'm thinking about GamerGate, I'm thinking about how on earth some like human person who doesn't understand any of the context or any of the information that's necessary to really understand what it is, explaining it to that kind of person. Like this means the implications of this are that every single possible thing in human society is like Gamergate in
to
that
them,
respect
right?
because
Well, I mean, like
because
well, we have interacted with them for thousands of years, right? So like
sure,
they have some understanding of human. I'm sure they have opinions about us, a
I
different opinions
would
about us.
wager that's true. I would wager that's true. But I would wager they don't have any idea what MSNBC is.
That's probably true. That's I would agree with you there
Or even
probably.
or the concept of journalistic integrity. Like
Or they cracked our language like centuries ago, and they're kind of
yeah,
like laughing
they've
to
just
each
been
other about
paying
us.
attention. like, like passing a joint around, having
Yeah,
a laugh at the humans.
yeah. But no, that's a
Could
very
be,
interesting.
could
That's an
be.
alien mind.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
really is. Chat Porcelain says mammal minds are similar. Well, I don't know if we have no way of understanding the context. It's you know what it is.
Well,
I'm
the
reading the book
mind,
Accession. It's an outside context problem. That's what's happening
the mind could be very similar. Yes, that's. I mean,
in
that could be entirely
developmental
true.
types.
But
Sure, you're right.
yes, like
But how
there's a
they
lot of
think.
physical similarities that could exist, and the neurons could interact in very similar ways. But you have to also consider that the environment that they've existed in, the ocean, is completely different than the environment that we exist in. In no way could a human being understand what that is like and never having a break of anything other than that their entire lives.
Also,
It's not an experience any human has had at this point.
1,000%. Also, like the video, people, and leave a comment too. I don't care what you comment. Yell at me, tell me I'm a terrible person. I don't care. But leave a comment. Preferably nice ones, I guess. Not even nice ones, but truthful ones. Don't just like make shit up. But yeah, leave comments. I don't care. I like comments. Also, were there any games journalism reforms you would have liked to have seen happen?
That's a good question. I have to think about that for a second, I think. Well, first off, again, like any of the alleged things that happened, it should just automatically be institutionally like not allowed. Like there should be consequences for a journalist who like there I know that there are people who think that whatever the alleged things that Nathan Grayson did. There are people who think that he didn't do those things, and I don't want to argue with those people. But what I want to say is that consequences and um specific protocols need to be created, or if not created, made public for accountability reasons that make that, and we're obviously just talking about like games journalism right now. Like I think that there are much wider implications for journalism in general, but for games journalism, just not being able to have those, there needs to be some kind of barrier set up to those outside relationships, not necessarily even to individuals in the way that they've done it, but some forms of institutional relationships as well. Like it's very easy for fairness in perspective presented by a journalist can be influenced. It's very easy for that, and I think that there needs to be more done in terms of preventing that kind of influence from impacting a journalist's work. Obviously, that goes across the board outside of games journalism as well, but I think that's a real problem in games journalism from my perspective, anyways. I mean, I don't have I have never worked at Kotaku's. I don't know how they work internally. I don't know what their concerns are internally, but from an outside perspective, I would hope that that would be something that could be taken more seriously, even now, because I don't know that it's a lot different now. I feel like there's a lot of, obviously, the relationships in question with Grayson and Zoe Quinn are sexual, but I'm not speaking
Even if
specifically
it
to
weren't, they
sexual.
had a very close personal
Correct.
friendship, which
Correct.
was
That's
undisclosed.
and I think that there's friendships, and there are institutional relationships that I think are comparable, if not necessarily exactly the same thing, but are similar problems. And I think that that kind of stuff needs to be taken more seriously. I think there needs to be protocol, there needs to be accountability, and I don't know that there really has been a lot that has changed in that respect. I could be wrong, because again, I don't know the internal workings of Kotaku, for instance, but that would be my primarily, especially coming from the perspective of reevaluating from my perspective what people who didn't get rabbit holed towards any individual really cared about. That would be, I would hope, kind of the number one concern, because if you were able to either disincentivize or even stop those types of relationships from happening, I think you have a marked improvement over what everything is just in terms of capability. I don't know that that fixes every problem, obviously, but um, I think that that would be a big improvement. And obviously not just with Kotaku, but with any with any outlet selling itself as actual journalism and games journalism and saying that we hire games journalists and stuff. It's one thing if you're a hobbyist organization. It's one thing because if you notate that and you say we're not journalists, we're hobbyists, or like, I think being clear about what you are is also helpful. Those types of things. Like, I think that a lot of what passes for games journalism is hobbyism, and I don't think I would see it as a big problem if it billed itself as that. You know, I feel like you shouldn't be stopped from engaging in hobbyist reporting. It's just that's not really quote unquote journalism. You know.
All right. Um, if you were the editor in chief of a gaming website and some of your employees were accused of ethical violations, what would you have done?
Am I an owner of the institution or just an editor?
Editor in chief, the chief editor.
Well, my first thing would be, do I have okay? So, as editor in chief, do I have the capability of suspending, or
Yes, you
is that
have
like a board decision?
carte blanche to do basically anything you want, essentially, for this hypothetical, let's say. Well, any reasonable power that you would expect an editor chief to have, like, so you could suspend people and, let's say, or fire
Okay,
them
I would
even.
suspend people involved pending investigation, and I would also um I would go to the people who own the outlet, and I would begin working with them on, do we have protocol for this, in terms of what our finding, like, for me, suspension pending investigation is you do that right away. There's no like
Over
you
an
don't have to stop.
allegation.
I think that it's not necessarily something that you can blanket. Like if it is a it's not something I could say that I would blanket do for any allegation whatsoever. But if the allegation is something that directly undermines the credibility of the outlet, like the allegations we were just speaking about a moment ago, I think those do undermine the credibility of the outlet. Uh, that would be to me suspension pending investigation. Not necessarily suspension without pay. I don't necessarily think that that's like I don't think that they should just on an allegation have their life basically taken away from them, unable to pay their rent, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that having them continue to operate amid that allegation, if it is something that actually undermines the credit of the organization, it's not something that is acceptable to do. I think so. That would be my first move. My second move would be going to the ownership and being like, "What's our protocol?" And if they don't have protocol, I want to attempt to establish protocol. Um, Meaning consequences, etc. If the allegation is found to be true, that and it's something that undermines the credibility of the organization, that person probably has to be terminated from the organization because it's it's
Well,
it's
credibility
necessary.
is what your entire organization, in theory, should be built on, right?
Exactly,
Or not
exactly. If
entirely,
you
but in large, huge degree. Basically, reputation, right? Basically,
absolutely well, journalism in our current system, if you do not have credibility, you don't have anything.
right?
Like it's if you are known to be making stuff up, you there's no purpose. Like you can't if you're known to make stuff up, you're not a journalistic outlet. Like you're fiction. Like I mean, if people again, that's why I say if it's hobbyist press, if it's just like publishing press releases and saying how awesome they are, that's fine. I like this is a free country. You should be allowed to do that. But it's billing itself as journalism is maybe I disagree with that. But we're talking about journalism and we're talking about what's necessary to run a credible journalistic outlet. I think it's suspension pending investigation. If you find out the thing is true and it's something that's actually a danger to the outlet's credibility, that person has to go. It's just not. I don't see any other path. Like there could be protocol outside of that. That there could be circumstances that complicate it. But to me, if it's in a straightforward situation, that's my if I have unlimited power, as far as I am aware that an editor in chief has, that would be my path that I would take.
Do you think there is still a role for good games journalism in the world, and if so, what does that look like to you?
I think there's a role. We talked about it some last time. The idea of getting information out of companies regarding games that are releasing, in terms of like bugs and things that they like to keep away from the public. Like I understand that it's very difficult because it involves developing relationships with people who would be willing to endanger their jobs by leaking information. But potentially, you are talking about sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a serious amount of money. It's you could be like a lot of the time when, for instance, they sneak microtransactions in a week later. Obviously, that's not something they make the decision during that sometime between release and when they put the microtransactions in a week later. That's a dishonest tactic, and it's something that they would have had to have planned because it doesn't take a week to write the store's code. Um, I feel like that's the kind of it's very difficult to imagine a situation where that's an easy thing to have going. But man, the amount of money that moves around in the gaming industry, you would hope that that there would be some way for that to be possible. And again, it is asking people to leak information. It is asking people to do things that are potentially dangerous to their jobs, which is why anonymity and sourcing and all of those types of things, you would need real journalists that actually care about um, that, people that, in my opinion, go well beyond what the reputation that games journalism has. Like, in theory, any type of journalism is legitimate journalism and has a role. Um, but again, we're talking about so much money moving around, and a lot of the time, very dishonest things that companies do. Exposing that, it would be a fantastic. I wish that there was more of that. I feel like I just really wish that there was more of that.